Este povo não tem condição de continuar migrando, não tem condição de viver como peão, porque peão pode trabalhar só quando ele tem saúde. Quando ele não tem mais saúde, ele não tem mais aonde ir. E ele é indigente para o Estado. Este povo não precisa gastar o resto da sua vida como indigente. Eles são pessoas humanas que merecem felicidade igual a qualquer um de nós.
We have 70,000 papers going out every month to different parts of the country and all over the world, expressing not just the sense of charity, trying to write in the paper, we're all trying to write about another kind of a social order in which men are given an opportunity to develop their capacities, their talents, their abilities, and don't have to go around selling their labor and suffering this degradation and the shame of unemployment.
Every human person has a right to food, to clothing, to shelter, to health. And I believe that this was their call. And they're calling us to task always in the same way.
Dorothy Day, she's one of the founders of the Catholic worker movement. She died in 1980. She was born in the 1800s, and she actually wasn't raised anything. Her parents were not religious at all, and earlier in her life she was involved with different socialist movements, different communist movements, because she felt those were the movements in America that were really trying to help the poor, that were really trying to help the worker. So then she became Catholic herself, and for her, she started going to Mass. She still wrote for different communist and socialist newspapers, but she felt she could no longer participate with them in their marches and protests like before because of their atheism. And so she felt herself struggling, and it was about 3 or 4 years into becoming Catholic that she ran into a French peasant by the name of Peter Morin.
But he was the answer to her prayer. She had prayed the day before at a communist-sponsored rally in Washington, D.C., a March of the Unemployed. She had prayed for a way to be open for her to work, now as a Catholic Christian, for the working people, for the poor, for the immigrants, as she had when she was with the communists and the socialists, but now specifically as a Catholic Christian. And when she met Peter Morin, well, it took a while, but she realized, here was it, that if you wanted to have Catholic leadership in the struggle for social justice, okay, do what you're telling other people to do. Just do it yourself. Personal responsibility. One of the key ideas of the Catholic worker.
And so it was at this point that she really started to get re-energized in her Catholic faith, because at that point she was about to fall away, or she was close to it. She was really struggling because she felt that her Catholicism really wasn't helping the poor. It wasn't doing anything substantial to make the world a better place, because she just felt she was just going to Mass on a regular basis, and that's what Catholics do.
Peter Morin, the French peasant, the worker, teacher, you might say, came to me because of things that I had written and suggested that we start a paper that would give social teachings of the church. And he had a very simple and a very basic program to meet the depression and unemployment. He thought in terms of the works of mercy as an immediate way of relieving poverty. He thought of feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and sheltering the harborless. All of these are part of the works of mercy, you know. And he suggested houses of hospitality and farming communes to sort of reestablish some measure of ownership of property, and also to restore a common ownership of property like that of the early Christians.
Dorothy said, well, the only thing that we really can do is a paper. I mean, I come from a journalistic family. I'd love to have a paper. Okay, we'll produce a paper. And in the paper, they talked about houses of hospitality where people could come with their needs. So people started knocking on her door saying, where's the house of hospitality? I'm in need. And, well, there wasn't one. So there had to be one. So she simply rented an apartment.
Then other people read the newspaper and thought it was a good idea and wrote Dorothy and said, can I do something like this? And she'd write them back and say, yeah, just start inviting people in your home. And so the Catholic worker movement all of a sudden started having houses popping up in Milwaukee and Chicago and in different parts of the United States.
But there was a lot of dislocation in the country, a lot of radical ferment. The communist and socialist movements were at their height. And when the Catholic worker came out with a radicalism that wasn't based in materialism and Marxism and class war, but based upon the gospel and the idea of the mystical body of Christ.
There was a horrible crisis, with the Depression and land being seized and farms being consolidated and everything, and the streets of the cities were full of people who had been farmers.
Peter said that they must start a new movement, a revolutionary movement. We have a red revolution, and that's not good enough. We have to have a green revolution. Green referring to the countryside, agriculture.
I think Peter Morin really wanted the Catholic worker to be a rural movement, a rural back to the land movement that would have some people in the city, but basically a rural movement. And people live on their own land and are free of debt and can decide for themselves what they're going to do, how they're going to spend their time, and how they're going to use their resources. They're not going to voluntarily anymore work so that we can have cheap bananas, or come here and work in our factories. You know, they'll live on their own land, and they will use their land and their labor in ways that benefit themselves and their own communities.
And that's why we're here at Peter Moran Farm. The people who come here out of need are more important than the garden. But we also think it's very important to keep Peter Moran's third plank alive. His idea that modern society is too much focused on the city, and that we forget the culture of the land, the culture of the people of the land. We forget even that our lives depend upon the earth, the air, the water, these natural things.
Catholic worker houses all over the country and all over the world, and each one's a little different. At Causa, we provide hospitality for Latino families. We do community outreach, and we also work for social justice. So the biggest piece of the three parts of the ministry is the hospitality. A lot of Catholic worker houses they serve single men, single women, families. Our ministry, our hospitality is specifically for Latino families. So we have at the house right now, we have 4 families. Actually, we have single moms right now, so 4 moms and their children, and they stay at the house for 6 to 9 months. And while they're at the house, we provide basic things like food, shelter, hygiene supplies, medicine, very basic things, sort of anything that they need to work on to have a stable living environment when they move on.
We are feeding people, and we are trying to make change, but instead of trying to change these people, we're turning around and we're going to the corporate structures.
Interest and war were the 2 great problems of the day. 2 of the greatest problems of the day. And when the church puts this money out, money lending at interest, and gets itself involved with war industries, and what isn't involved? Anybody who owns any kind of investments, if you put your money in the bank puts it out. If you put it in mutual funds, they put it out. So that in a way we're all guilty, every single one of us. And that's why I say that when we're dealing with these issues and writing about this, we're not writing about this from any height of virtue. It's just something that we as an American people are involved in.
Most Americans do not realize the total military involvement of the United States all over the world. Most Americans think that we're in Iraq, we're in Afghanistan, maybe we have something to do with Israel, and maybe we're doing something in Colombia because there's this war on drugs, which really isn't a war on drugs, but other than that, most Americans have no idea that we're involved in countless other countries and messing with their politics and messing with their militaries, training many of their militaries here. Americans are just clueless.
George Kennan was a State Department analyst after World War II. You might have heard his name. He later became a big advocate for nuclear disarmament. But he wrote a policy paper in 1949, after World War II, for the State Department that was classified until the 1970s, where he said that the reality of the world is the United States controls 60% of the world's resources with 5% of the population. And he said we must find a way to maintain that disparity without compromising our security. Which of course is impossible. You can't maintain that disparity without detriment to security. 9/11 proved that. That this disparity is something that it's the cause of war, and it necessitates war. In a world where some people are very rich and some people are very poor, war is just the natural condition. And the Vietnam War was going on, and I knew no one except people my age who were against the war. And our pastors at church, our teachers at school, our parents, I knew no one who was older who was not decrying that war.
So, you know, I lived through this period when we were ridiculed. I would talk to priests and to professors, and they'd say, "You're crazy. You may be in good conscience, but you're not thinking with the mind of the church. This is not really good Catholic doctrine." Well, now they could never say that. And it was partly, and in good part, because of Dorothy and her friends and allies, and their steadfast witness, and their active participation in the preparation for Vatican II. It made a difference, and it's going to continue to make a difference.
If it wasn't for someone like Dorothy Day, I don't know if the Catholic Church in America would take pacifism as seriously as it does. During World War I, if you would have said, "I don't believe in war because I'm Catholic," and you refused to serve, they would throw you in jail. They would say Catholics believe in war. But it is, I think, largely due to the influence of Dorothy Day that in World War II, and then of course now in Vietnam, and since then, conscientious objectors are considered, and pacifism itself is considered a legitimate stance for Catholics in America.
And when I got to New York City, and meeting people like Dorothy Day and Dan Berrigan and Phil Berrigan, Liz McAllister, all these people got to be my friends. And I saw older people who were doing everything they could, who were risking their lives and their fortunes, and were going to prison, losing their jobs to try to end the war.
We started the very first demonstration against the war. It was the 16th day of July, 1963. And there were only two of us. The first demonstration against the war was 2 men. But what I did was I told all the peace people in New York that the Catholic worker was having an ongoing demonstration at this place, the home of the permanent representative of Saigon to the United Nations, and that on the 10th day, everybody should come and join us. I didn't say it was only 1 or 2 of us a day. Well, 250 people came, and we had coast-to-coast television. And that was the beginning of the Vietnam War movement, anti-war movement.
All we are saying is give me a chance. All we are saying is give me a chance. All we are saying.
And I think that today there is certainly the beginnings of a movement of nonviolence all over the world. Of course, the teachings of Gandhi in India, and Vinoba Bhave today, his successor, and then the work here in our country of the Martin Luther King movement and the Cesar Chavez movement in the West Coast. They wouldn't like to have it labeled in that way, but I think that their names are so familiar to people, both in the union field, which interests me very much because I think that it's beginning to work from the bottom up instead of from the top down. It's an entirely different political point of view, and it makes for peace.
Probably one of the most famous labor movements in recent American history was during the 60s and 70s. There was a grape boycott in the United States led by Cesar Chavez. And Cesar Chavez and Dorothy Day were pretty good friends. And that was actually one of the times that they were doing a surge in the boycott and in protesting in California. Cesar Chavez asked Dorothy Day to come out, and at the time that was in 1973, and that was the last time that Dorothy Day was arrested.
But Cesar Chavez is a Mexican, and they have successfully, for the first time, organized farm workers, not only in California and Arizona, but also in Florida. And so they're bringing to it a very, very deep thinking, and they're thinking in terms of an entirely new social order. There is this effort to become new men and to live with hope and faith in their fellow workers, that man is able to make a different kind of surroundings.
Farm workers have terrible conditions in the United States, and there's no laws about them needing to get paid any amount. There's no health care, no vacation, and I think part of it probably has to do with racism in the United States, because most farm workers in the United States are either of Mexican descent or are Mexicans themselves, or maybe from some other country in Central America. And so I think there's a sense, even though many of them might be themselves born in the United States, it's like, well, they came here to work, so, I don't care about them that much.
Dorothy Day was realizing that there was a whole subgroup in the world that were homeless, were oppressed, were poor, and she wanted to do something about it. And we wanted to do something about it also, because we were becoming more and more aware of this, I would call it a subclass at that time, of the poor and the oppressed.
Quando eu comecei a realmente trabalhar na prática com o povo lá nos Estados Unidos, lá com o povo migrante mexicano, eu trabalhei bastante anos. E quando eu cheguei aqui no Brasil, eu tinha um desejo, mais uma vez, de trabalhar nesse mesmo sentido, trabalhar com o povo que tinha a mão na terra, e ajudar este povo a trabalhar a terra para que a terra produza a vida sustentável para eles não tenham que ficar migrando, para que eles tenham uma vida mais estável, que dá permanência e dá dignidade, para que seu trabalho traz fruto suficiente para ter uma vida boa.
When Sister Dorothy went from Chicago to Phoenix, Arizona, she worked with the migrant workers. And it was there that it deepened her desire to work with the poor and the oppressed. One of her students tells the story of her going into one of the camps, and as she was under the tree, they were sitting under a tree teaching the children, and a small plane flew over to dust the crops with pesticides. And Dorothy yelled out, "Run, run," because she knew that these pesticides had been causing all kinds of health problems and physical problems. And when she yelled out, "Run, run," the sisters ran, the students ran, but the people that were picking the crops kept on picking the crops. And she realized that they couldn't leave their work. and they couldn't run to safety, or they would have lost their jobs. And she became very angry. The students said she cried, and she was so angry. And it was experiences such as these that convinced her more and more that she needed to work with the poorest.
She loved those people. She just loved the farm workers, the Mexican farm workers, and their families. They were such loving people, and they were so close to the soil. Their lives were so, in a sense, the poverty was so tragic and the injustice. At the same time, she wanted to help them, and she found among them that wonderful spirit of faith and the ability to live and to believe in spite of all the hardships that the people had. So when she went to Brazil, she found herself in a situation where she was working again with farm workers and their families.
We went down on the same plane. We studied in Petrópolis at Senfi, and we went then up to Coroatá, Maranhão, where we worked together for 8 years until she moved up into the Amazon area.
Quando nós saímos, que eu saí junto com ela do Maranhão, viemos para o Pará por quê? Porque a Transamazônica tinha aberto e muitos dos maranhenses vinham para cá, para o Pará. Então a Dorothy sempre pioneira, essa é a característica dela também, sempre na frente, sabe? Ela disse, olha, Rebeca, o povo está indo, bora nós também atrás deles.
Porque lá fora, quando a gente ouvia a propaganda da Amazônia, a gente achava que vinha para o céu. Um lugar onde corria leite e mel. Tão fácil, estrada era fácil, escola, tudo. A gente via assim muita propaganda, né? Então, o meu esposo e meu cunhado na época, né, vieram olhar e tal, se agradaram das terras e aí a gente veio. Eu praticamente não conhecia, nem minha irmã, que viemos junto, né? Aí viemos assim com a cara e a coragem, achando que vinha praticamente para o céu. Quando chegamos aqui que a gente começou a ver a realidade. Muita doença, muita malária tinha na época. No inverno não passava nada, era intrafegável as estradas.
Hoje a gente já pode ter uma ideia dessa forma de desenvolvimento mais de 35 anos depois. Já se dá para ter uma ideia do que foi isso. E essa região, onde ela foi implantada por excelência, essa forma de desenvolvimento, é hoje a região campeã em morte de trabalhadores rurais no campo e campeã em trabalho escravo no Brasil. Não é isso que é desenvolvimento para a Amazônia.
O governo assentou as famílias e depois abandonou. Abandonou, literalmente. Nós nunca tivemos acesso à justiça, ou aquilo que a gente entende por justiça. Nós nunca tivemos segurança contra quaisquer tipos de violência. Terra sem lei significa que o grande manda. Quem grita mais alto, quem fala mais alto, quem grita, ele tem razão. Então tem casos aí que poderia contar, infinitos casos aí, que famílias foram amedrontadas e depois expulsos à bala mesmo. E não tiveram onde correr. As únicas, modéstia à parte, se não fosse a igreja, modéstia à parte, mas a bem da verdade tem que ser dito, se não fosse a igreja, esse povo teria sido na pior. Porque nós, pelo menos, denunciamos esses fatos. Às vezes fomos ouvidos, às vezes ignorados, às vezes ameaçados.
Tem organizações de grileiros, fazendeiros, que têm seus pistoleiros. E tem fazendeiros que contratam grupo de segurança que se torna para nós milícias. E eles ficam lá provocando o povo, queimam as casas do povo. Então, essa tensão que nós estamos passando é muito difícil.
Primeiro eles chegam com ameaça e tudo, e pedindo para sair e tal, e ameaçando. Aí, quando eles resistem mesmo, eles partem para apelar mesmo. Bota fogo nas casas, que teve vários, né? Principalmente aqui no PDS. Põe fogo nos barracos, bota as famílias para correr com criança e tudo. E arma, né? Bota pistoleiro para atirar, para amedrontar. E se teimar mesmo, eles chegam a matar mesmo. E aí, assim, depois que Dorothy chegou, em 82, que a gente começou a ver uma luz, como assim, uma luz no fim do túnel, né? Vendo que a Amazônia tinha solução, né? Da gente permanecer aqui e tentar mudar isso para melhor.
She wanted to educate the children. She wanted to form a camaraderie. You know, people work together. She wanted to teach the adults that they could work together and they could make a difference. And if they worked together, they would make a difference. I think that's what she wanted to do.
Quando ela chegou aqui em 82, não tinha nada. Esse povo era completamente abandonado pelo INCRA. Era para o povo sair, o plano foi este, mas o povo ficou. Depois foi atrás de educar, formar professores, formar agentes de saúde, foi tudo nessa vida. Depois foi vicinal, estrada, tudo ajudando o povo a se organizar para cobrar e exigir. E era arrancar dente, nunca nada aqui era fácil.
E aí começamos uma vida toda, né, junto com ela, nos trabalhos sociais, fundação de associações, na questão da educação, que não tinha nada, né, e o meio ambiente mesmo, né, nessa época ela já... A gente quase não entendia muita coisa não, mas ela já começava a mostrar a importância, né, de preservar a Amazônia, preservar isso aqui, né, segurar a terra para os pequenos, né, os trabalhadores aqui. E aí a gente começou essa luta assim para a melhoria da região.
Então nós temos uma paixão e grande para ajudar este povo a ficar na terra, de ter condição de trabalhar a terra com suas mãos, com projetos que o próprio INCRA tem condição de oferecer, que vem oferecendo para nós no projeto PDS, Projeto de Desenvolvimento Sustentável. E este projeto faz com que o lavrador ocupe a terra de uma maneira bastante elevante. Ele vai trabalhar a terra de uma maneira que dá mais vida à terra. Ele não vai destruir a Amazonas. Ele vai ter sua lavoura branca de uma maneira um pouco mais limitada e vai plantando mais bem de raiz que é em harmonia com o que já existe na natureza, para que ele tenha uma vida mais digna. E não exige que ele migre outra vez. O povo está cansado de migrar.
Ajudou, porque ela ajudou nós a arrumar esse pedaço de terra que hoje nós temos. E ela ajudou em várias coisas, porque sempre ela vinha aqui em casa e falava: gente, vocês têm que ter força para lutar e segurar o lote. Porque quando nós entramos para cá, que só era uma picadinha, que não tinha ninguém, só era nós. E ela deu bastante força para nós sobreviver aqui dentro até agora. Aí nós já temos nós já botamos uma roça e já temos o que comer.
Então a Dorothy se meteu mesmo para fazer essa coisa funcionar. Cadastrava o pessoal, botava. E tanto no PDS como no outro assentamento, o que ela dizia? Não insuflava nada. Ela encorajava e incentivava. Fica aqui, vocês têm direitos, como de fato a pessoa tem. Vocês não têm que sair. Senta aí, finca o pé. É assim. Isso os outros chamavam isso de insuflar. A gente chama isso de incentivar. Mas não para conflito. para ficar na terra, simplesmente ficar na terra.
A vida dela mesma ficou à disposição dessa população que lutava contra o modelo predatório de desenvolvimento predatório. Lutava por esse novo modelo, o socioambientalismo, que a terra não ficasse na mão de poucos proprietários rurais, mas sim que fosse dividida por essa imensa gama de trabalhadores rurais e que sabiam como utilizar os recursos da floresta sem degradá-la.
Brazil has about 30% of the world's biodiversity. And so can you imagine when somebody chops down a tremendous area that burns for 10 days and we've lost forever all that biodiversity that took thousands of years for all of this plant life to originate and to develop. And we've lost in one fire. It's gone forever. And so how can we help bring an awareness of what's happening? Because we have many magnificent animals, birds. We desire that the future generations have a chance to know about these. We see a terrible climate change here, and that's one of the big things that makes me as a person work. When I came here, we had 9 months of rain, and we're down now to 5 or 6 months of rain. I feel we're all responsible to reduce global warming so that there's a tomorrow, so that there's a chance for people to live and enjoy the beauties of this magnificent world.
Our lifestyles as Americans, they simply have to change. How we're living is just not sustainable. It's just impossible. We're seeing that with the environment, all kinds of things, the economy and the peak oil and all these issues. We're running at a brick wall.
When Peter talked about going back to the land in the 1930s, it sounded like a romantic idea. It sounded even reactionary. A lot of people took it as reactionary. It wasn't practicable. It didn't make any sense, given the real needs of the world as they were perceived at that time in the 30s. And came the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and nothing much changed in that regard. But then, little by little, we became aware that the Earth is under siege. The biosphere is under siege. It's not just pollution, it's global warming, it's the rising seas, it's the lack of arable land, it's time that we took Peter Morin's idea and put it into the 21st century. It makes a lot more sense than people thought. It's a very urgent concern now.
Se no Pará a luta for vencida pelo desenvolvimento predatório de madeireiros e fazendeiros, a mesma coisa se dará na próxima década no estado do Amazonas, que é para onde a nova fronteira está seguindo. Se a luta que se ganhar for a do socioambientalismo, a dos movimentos sociais, que querem desenvolvimento, sim, mas exploração racional dos recursos da floresta, que não vem monocultura nenhuma como desenvolvimento, e sim a exploração de todas essas culturas, como fazem os ribeirinhos há centenas de anos, é esse modelo que vai se ter transportado na próxima década para o estado do Amazonas. Então, o Pará é apenas a porta de entrada da Amazônia. O que está em jogo aqui é saber quem vai vencer essa luta, porque aquele que vencer terá a Amazônia toda como prêmio.
Mas minha grande preocupação é o povo aqui do PDS Virola Jatubá, onde houve morte no dia 30 de maio. E o povo vive muito assombrado, porque eles vivem dia e noite sem saber se eles vão atacar outra vez. Vieram 2 vezes encapuçados, e o povo tem mulher, criança.
And I was just so worried about her then. And I was afraid that there were a lot of false accusations. And I was afraid that she would end up in a Brazil jail. And I was just very, very afraid for her. And I said, Dorothy, are you sure you should go back? And I'll never forget, she was just standing there, her sandals, her culottes, her t-shirt, and her big smile. And she said, I have to go back. She said, these are my people.
The last time that I talked to her on the phone, which was February 2nd, 2005, was the first time I had heard her down, sad, because she was primarily a very happy person. And she was very upset because she had asked the police for protection for the people in Esperanza, and they would not give it. And the day she went to Esperanza, on the 11th, she called her brother David, and she told him that she was calling him to tell him to pray for her because she was going to go to Esperanza and she was nervous about it. So was she afraid? Yeah, I think she was. I think we'd all be afraid if we knew we were on a death list. Did that stop her? No.
Raifran, por que você matou a irmã Dorothy? Por que, Raifran, você matou a irmã? Por que, Raifran, você matou a irmã?
A sociedade que eu vi da sua boca, se foi você que matou a Dorothy, a mando de quem?
Quem mandou? Vou falar para vocês.
A história da Dorothy é a história dos macacos, né?
Que história é essa?
Né? Que é a história da floresta, né? Que ela sempre começa assim: você já ouviu o macaco chorar? Já sentiu o choro de macaco no seu coração? Aí ela vai contar como este fazendeiro aqui, né? Era uma derrubada monstro de grande. Aí ele foi derrubando e deixou uma área no meio de floresta. E os animais todos foram para lá. Aí ele começou o fogo de fora. E o fogo foi consumindo até chegar naquela matinha no meio. Aí queimou todos os animais. Aí ela disse que você poderia escutar o pânico, né? O medo. Na medida que o fogo chegava, e depois foi o choro. Era o choro dos macacos que ficou mais alto do que qualquer outra coisa. Aí ela disse que cortava o coração. Aí essa é a história da mata que morre, que não é árvore morta, é vida. É vida que é de onde vem nossa vida. Nossa vida é intimamente ligada com a vida da mata, com a terra, com o chão.
If Americans would stop buying furniture that's from areas of the world where deforestation is happening, obviously that in itself would greatly decrease the amount of deforestation, and then in hand maybe partly decrease the amount of slavery and the rest that goes on. And I think again, this is why Dorothy Day was more of an anarchist. Like she knows that things aren't going to change unless people decide to make the hard changes. It might actually involve sacrifice.
Everybody can, in a very democratic way, can share in these world's gifts. If they've been invented, why should only a few share in them? Why can't more people share in the marvelous creativity that has come to our planet? Our people live very simply and happily without having so many things. So we have to learn to have the necessary things of life and not ask ourselves, what do we want, but what do I need?
For both Dorothy Stang and Dorothy Day, the cause is people, and the love of people. And both of them spent their lives trying to make it possible for people to realize their own human dignity and the potential that they have as people.
And I think that's what both Dorothy Day and her friend Peter Moore and Dot Stang did. I think they saw what could be good in people.